Before our military wedding, a retired sergeant hid me in a fitting room. Then I heard the truth. The wedding flowers were already being delivered to the base chapel when my entire life imploded in the back of a dusty military surplus and uniform alteration shop. Everyone on base called us the golden couple. I was a decorated colonel, and he was the rising star everyone expected to make general. But 24 hours before our full military wedding, a retired Army sergeant, a man who had served under my father and knew the true meaning of a soldier's honor, looked out the shop window, turned deathly pale, and shoved me into a dark fitting room. "Colonel, whatever you hear, do not come out," he whispered, his hand shaking on the curtain. Seconds later, the front doorbell chimed, and the arrogant, unmistakable voice of my fiancé filled the room. His very first sentence stripped away a decade of lies, and in that suffocating silence, I realized my perfect marriage was actually a perfectly executed trap. The base chapel was already decorated with crisp white ribbons, and the scent of fresh lilies filled the air, marking the final countdown to what everyone called the military wedding of the year. My name is Victoria. I am 36 years old, and as a newly promoted Army colonel, I had spent my entire adult life sacrificing personal happiness for the uniform. I was a legacy officer, following in the footsteps of a father who taught me that honor wasn't just a word, it was a way of survival. Everyone on base thought I had finally found the perfect partner to share that heavy burden. My fiancé was a rising star in the logistics division, a charming, brilliant officer who knew exactly how to make me laugh after a brutal 14-hour shift. Together, we were a powerhouse couple, the kind of pair people saluted with a little extra pride. With less than 24 hours left before the ceremony, I decided to make one last unscheduled stop. I needed a quick final adjustment on the sleeve of my formal dress uniform, so I pulled up to the local military alterations and surplus shop just outside the base gates. The shop was owned by Sergeant Miller, a retired veteran who had served under my father decades ago and treated me like his own daughter. As the bell above the door chimed, I smiled, looking forward to his usual warm greeting. I had no idea that walking into that small, quiet shop would be the moment my carefully built world began to violently unravel. Sergeant Miller didn't smile when I walked in. Instead, his eyes darted past my shoulder, out the shop's front window, and a sudden, deathly pale wash covered his weathered face. Before I could even open my mouth to say hello, his rough hand gripped my arm with surprising strength, pulling me sharply across the floor and shoving me into the dark, cramped fitting room at the back. "Colonel, whatever you hear, don't come out," he whispered, his voice trembling as he aggressively snapped the heavy curtain shut, plunging me into deep shadows. A second later, the brass bell above the front door chimed. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as the arrogant, unmistakable voice of my fiancé boomed through the small shop. He wasn't alone. The heavy, hurried footsteps of another man followed him inside. "Miller, tell me the colonel's dress uniform is ready," my fiancé demanded, his tone completely stripped of the warmth and humility he always practiced whenever he was around me. "The sooner she puts on that ring tomorrow, the sooner I control her clearance, and the sooner we can finally clean out those base logistics accounts." The words hit me like a physical blow in the dark. The man I loved, the partner I trusted with my life, wasn't marrying me for love at all. His very first sentence had completely laid bare a chilling, calculated scheme. I stood frozen behind the thin curtain, my heart hammering against my ribs, realizing that my perfect upcoming military wedding was nothing more than a beautifully executed trap. The civilian accomplice let out a low, cynical chuckle that echoed sharply against the glass display cases. "Are you sure she doesn't suspect anything, Marcus? She's a full colonel. You're playing with fire here." My fiancé, Marcus, dismissed the warning with a cold, mocking laugh that made my skin crawl. "Victoria, please, She's brilliant on the battlefield, but when it comes to me, she's completely blind. I've spent 2 years playing the devoted, supportive partner, feeding her ego while ensuring her signature goes on every single logistics and supply contract we needed to clear. She thinks we're building a legacy together. She actually believes this is a romance. I pressed my back against the cold wall of the fitting room, my hands clenched into tight fists to keep them from shaking. The thin fabric of the curtain offered no protection from the brutal reality of their conversation. Once the marriage license is filed tomorrow, Marcus continued, his voice dripping with absolute arrogance, her power of attorney transfers to me under the pre-nuptial agreement I subtly tweaked. We will route the upcoming multi-million-dollar base distribution contracts directly through our shell companies. By the time the Pentagon realizes the funds are missing, the trail will be completely cold, and the blame will fall squarely on her pristine record. Once we secure the cash, I'll orchestrate a quiet medical discharge for her. She can retire early, sit at home, and play the dutiful housewife while we enjoy the wealth her hard work provided us. The sheer calculation of it was dizzying. They weren't just planning to steal from the military. They were planning to completely destroy my career, my reputation, and my life, leaving me to face the legal fallout while they walked away rich. The heavy front door finally closed, and the chime of the brass bell signaled their departure, leaving a suffocating silence in its wake. I pushed the heavy curtain aside and stepped out of the dark fitting room, my face pale and my mind racing with a mix of fury and disbelief. Sergeant Miller stood near the counter, his shoulders tense, and his expression filled with deep regret. "I am so sorry you had to hear that, Victoria," he said softly, reaching under the counter. "But I couldn't let you walk into that chapel tomorrow, blind to the monster he really is." He pulled out a thick, official-looking manila folder and slid it across the glass display. "I've been tracking the base supply logs for 6 months. Marcus thought he was being clever, using your digital security clearance to authorize unauthorized shipments, but he left a trail." With trembling fingers, I opened the folder. Inside were printed bank statements for a shell company registered in Panama, forged logistics contracts bearing a clumsy imitation of my signature, and encrypted email threads detailing the exact timeline of their fraud. It was undeniable proof of grand larceny, wire fraud, and treason against the military. Marcus hadn't just betrayed my heart, he had compromised the integrity of the entire base command. Looking up at the retired sergeant who had just saved my life, the tears of betrayal dried instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. The predator thought he had cornered a victim, but he had no idea he was dealing with an army colonel. The rehearsal dinner that evening was held at the Officers' Club, a room filled with gleaming silver, crisp uniforms, and the low hum of polite conversation. When Marcus walked over to my table, his face wore that familiar, beautifully practiced smile that had fooled me for 2 long years. He leaned down, kissing my cheek with a tenderness that now made my skin crawl. "You look breathtaking, Victoria," he whispered, his eyes shining with what I now recognized as greedy anticipation. "Tomorrow, everything changes for us." "Yes," I replied, forcing my voice to remain completely steady as I adjusted his uniform collar with a perfectly calm hand. "Tomorrow, everyone gets exactly what they deserve." Throughout the night, I played the part of the blissful, trusting bride to perfection. I smiled for the photographs, clinked glasses with visiting dignitaries, and listened intently as Marcus boldly toasted to our shared future and his impending promotion. I subtly steered the conversation toward his logistics projects, watching with cold fascination as his arrogance blinded him to his own exposure. He spoke passionately about the upcoming multi-million-dollar distribution contracts, utterly convinced he was hours away from finalizing his masterstroke. He thought he was looking at a naive woman overwhelmed by wedding jitters. He had absolutely no idea that while he was busy celebrating his perceived victory, I had already spent the afternoon coordinating with the base military police and the Criminal Investigation Division, quietly laying a trap that would completely dismantle his life before he could ever step up to the altar. The morning sun broke sharply over the base chapel, casting a brilliant glow on the rows of gleaming sabers held by the honor guard. Inside the groom's holding room, Marcus stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his medals with the ultimate expression of victory. The door clicked open, and instead of the chaplain he expected, I walked in, flanked by the base commander and 4 heavily armed military police officers. Marcus turned, his smile faltering slightly as he took in my stern expression and the presence of the guard. "Victoria? What's going on? It's bad luck to see the bride right before the ceremony." "The only bad luck in this room is yours, Marcus," I said, my voice echoing with the cold authority of a commanding officer. With a sharp nod, the base commander stepped forward, laying the thick manila folder compiled by Sergeant Miller directly onto the table. "Captain Marcus, you are being placed under immediate arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and treasonous exploitation of military security clearances." The color drained instantly from Marcus's face as he stared at the forged logistics contracts and the incriminating shell company records spread out before him. He opened his mouth to lie, to weave another charming manipulation, but the cold click of steel handcuffs snapping around his wrists silenced him completely. The predator was caught. As he was led past the shocked wedding guests and out into a waiting military transport vehicle, the absolute ruin of his career, his reputation, and his freedom was finalized. He had wanted my power, but he only inherited his own destruction. 3 months later, I officially canceled the remaining ceremony arrangements, packed my belongings, and requested a transfer to a beautiful seaside naval command, completely leaving the painful memories of that base behind. Today, I am thriving in my career, my pristine reputation intact, and I am fully secure in the knowledge that my hard-earned rank belongs to me alone. Marcus is currently serving a lengthy sentence in a maximum security military prison, his dreams of wealth and power completely shattered by his own greed. His civilian accomplice faced similar federal charges, and their fraudulent shell companies were permanently dismantled. I often visit Sergeant Miller's shop whenever I am back in town, forever grateful for the profound loyalty of an old veteran who risked everything to protect a fellow soldier's honor. His quick thinking in that back room didn't just save my career, it saved my entire future. Now, I am incredibly curious about those of you who have listened to my story today. What would you have done if you were trapped in that dark fitting room, listening to the person you loved plot your absolute destruction? Would you have confronted him right then and there? Comment your thoughts below. And please, remember to comment the city you are watching from, so I can see exactly how far my story has reached. Thank you so much for watching until the very end.